Today we will be covering Genesis chapter 40. I've entitled this lesson, Joseph in Prison, Part 1. This is the first and really a two-parter, only divided by chapters, chapter 40 and then chapter 41. They fold over together quite nicely, but there really is a scene change between 40 and 41. But 40 sets up what is about to follow, which we'll get to next week, which is Joseph's rise in esteem and power. But before he rises yet again through the ranks, he finds himself, as we discovered him to be last week, in prison, and unjustly so. It was because of the accusation of Potiphar's wife, and so he finds himself in prison. But at the end of the last chapter, we read signs of hope, where Joseph, even in prison, was put basically in charge of the prison, was given authority and a leadership role even in prison. So there just seems to be something about Joseph and his character attributes and who he is intrinsically that causes him to be esteemed by those around him. But also, the main point from last week's lesson, the Lord is ever with him. Even in prison, the Lord is ever with him and causing him to prosper in spite of everything else. But not quite yet, as we will see in this chapter. It begins, verse 1. Sometime after this, the cupbearer of the king of Egypt and his baker offended their lord, the king of Egypt. Pharaoh was angry with his two officers, the chief cupbearer and the chief baker, and he put them in custody in the house of the captain of the guard, in the prison where Joseph was confined. The captain of the guard charged Joseph with them, and he waited on them, and they continued for some time in custody. Now, when I was a child, I felt like the prison sentence of the person who brought the king his drink and the person who baked the bread, I felt like this prison sentence was quite harsh and quite extreme and seemed arbitrary. And I even think I remember a cartoon where this was portrayed in a way that suggested that perhaps Pharaoh was displeased with the quality of the wine or the taste of the bread, and something very petty. And so I was always a little confused at this. But I learned something in preparation for this lesson that actually now seems a lot more obvious. And I'm surprised it never occurred to me before or was taught to me before. Hybert writes of this. Pharaoh's wine steward and baker held important roles in the court because they controlled access to the king's food. They had to be trusted completely, since poisoning food was one of the most common ways for rivals and traitors to harm their king. We aren't told why they had offended their master, end quote. And then I write, it may be that we are meant to suspect that there has been an attempt on the Pharaoh's life by way of poison. As those primarily responsible for making sure the Pharaoh's food was safe, the cupbearer and the baker would have been under intense scrutiny should such a poisoning attempt occur. Perhaps their initial time in jail was meant to provide an opportunity to determine who to fault for an attempted assassination. Again, we don't know for sure, but this actually seems plausible given the roles that the chief baker and the cupbearer were in. The story continues. One night, they both dreamed. The cupbearer and the baker of the king of Egypt, who were confined in prison, each his own dream, and each dream with its own meaning. When Joseph came to them in the morning, he saw that they were troubled. So he asked Pharaoh's officers, who were with him in custody in his master's house, "Why are your faces downcast today?" They said to him, "We have had dreams, and there is no one to interpret them." And Joseph said to them, "Do not interpretations belong to God? Please tell them to me." Now, we will learn in the next chapter that there seems to be some cottage industry around dream interpretation, and being a magician across the board. It seems that magicians were thought to fill a variety of roles, giving the Pharaoh advice, but also interpreting dreams and making predictions and whatnot. And it seems that this was something that these two men expected, that there would be somebody who could interpret the dream, but not here in prison. And Joseph says not only that does not only indicate that he might be able to help them but references God as the one who will help him in this way. Handel writes, dreams were largely regarded in the ancient Near East as a means by which God communicated with human beings. Through these nighttime messages, God gave instructions or alerted people to coming events. Dreams are a special mark of the Elohist stories. And this is what part of the Elohist scribal tradition, and he gives several citations in Genesis chapter 20, where Abimelech was given warning about taking Abraham's wife into his house by way of a dream. And then chapter 28 is where Jacob sees his ladder ascending into heaven. In 31, it's where Jacob gets a dream about what might happen if he should breed the spotted and striped goats in a certain way. And then in 37 was the dream that Joseph had about his family members bowing to him in deference for the two dreams. Now, you may have noticed that the dreams in the Joseph novella come in pairs of two. Handel writes, two dreams with the same theme are considered particularly reliable. And so by having these dreams come in couplets, it is ensuring that the reader and the person receiving the dreams understands that these are dreams that can be trusted. So you might wake up after a strange dream and say, well, that was a strange dream, but you dream the same dream twice in two different ways, then there's maybe some message that is trying to get through. Joseph shows himself to be an alert caregiver by honing in on the anxiety of his fellow prisoners. Here is yet another example of Joseph's excellence. Handel writes, the officers, unaware of Joseph's ability, say there is no one to interpret the dreams. Joseph shows that one doesn't need to be an Egyptian magician or wise man to interpret dreams, since interpretations belong to God. This is both a critique of professional and foreign seers and a pious statement of trust in God. Like his forebear Abraham, Joseph is a kind of prophet, discerning and mediating God's will through dream interpretation. The story continues. So the chief cupbearer told his dream to Joseph and said to him, in my dream, there was a vine before me, and on the vine there were 3 branches. As soon as it budded, its blossoms came out, and the clusters ripened into grapes. Pharaoh's cup was in my hand, and I took the grapes and pressed them into Pharaoh's cup, and placed the cup in Pharaoh's hand. Then Joseph said to him, this is its interpretation. The 3 branches are 3 days. Verse 13. Within 3 days, Pharaoh will lift up your head and restore you to your office, and you shall place Pharaoh's cup in his hand, just as you used to do when you were his cupbearer. Hybert writes, Joseph's own dreams ignited his brother's anger and got him into this difficulty. Now he will interpret dreams to get himself out of prison. So you see dreams functioning in 2 ways in Joseph's life, both getting him into a jam, and then going forward will continue to get him out of a jam. Fritham writes, these dreams provide mixtures of allegorical elements and literal descriptions of what will happen. Allegorical elements in the interpretations include the 3 branches / baskets, in other words, 3 days, the instant blossoming and ripening, in other words, soon, or in other words, the compression of time, this change in events is right on the horizon, and baked goods, which stand in for the flesh of the baker. These dreams require an interpreter more so than those in chapter 37, and this will be even more the case in 41. You may recall in chapter 37, Joseph tells his dreams to his brothers and his parents, and they immediately get the point, and they're not slow on the uptake, and they are infuriated. Not so with these dreams. They need someone to explain what it is that God is telling them. Verse 14. It goes, but remember me when it is well with you. Please do the kindness to make mention of me to Pharaoh, and so get me out of this place. By the way, that word translated here as kindness is hesed, which is often translated as blessing, often used to describe the ways that God treats us or blesses us or favors us with something for which we should be grateful for. So Joseph is asking that kind of blessing, that kind of kindness be shown to him by way of his fellow prisoner. He goes on, for in fact, I was stolen out of the land of the Hebrews, and here also I have done nothing that they should have put me into the dungeon. Fritham writes, We hear for the first time Joseph speaking openly about his own life. For the first time in the narrative, he becomes aggressive, is the word Fritham uses. I would use the word assertiveness. He becomes assertive, or in this case, aggressive, regarding his situation. The bottom line is he takes action. This is the first time where he takes an initiative to make something happen good in his favor. Fritham continues, although Joseph has the God-given ability to interpret dreams, he still needs human help. The one inspired by God pleads with a fellow prisoner for help. He asks to be remembered by another, as God remembers Noah, Abraham, Rachel, and the people of Israel, also in bondage in Egypt. But to be in need of human help also involves being open to human frailties. The one upon Joseph depends will forget Joseph, but not forever. Human help will finally be a key to Joseph's future, as it will be for virtually everybody. And you may notice that Fritham cross-references this account of Joseph being forgotten with the account of Exodus, where God remembers the people who are in exile. And so we are meant to see these parallels between Joseph's story and then the broad overall narrative of the people of Israel. And I only bring that up again to reemphasize for the umpteenth time that these stories were meant to be approached by a collective group, the Israelites, and for them to see their own situation in the narratives of these individuals, whether it be Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, Joseph, see themselves in their own in those narratives. And so that's this parallels are very much on purpose. What I like about these two verses is that we catch a glimpse of Joseph's frailty and lack of certainty about his future. Far from the stoic observer of his life's fate, he laments his current estate and seeks outside help. In short, he is human like the rest of us. We too do well to discern when we need to reach out for help from others. The story continues. When the chief baker saw that the interpretation was favorable, he said to Joseph, I also had a dream. There were 3 cake baskets on my head, and in the uppermost basket there were all sorts of baked food for Pharaoh, but the birds were eating it out of the basket on my head. Joseph answered, this is its interpretation. The 3 baskets are 3 days. Within 3 days, Pharaoh will lift up your head from you and hang you on a pole, and the birds will eat the flesh from you. Fritham writes, the chief baker then takes his turn, ironically, as it turns out, after the initial favorable interpretation. In his dream, 3 baskets of baked goods are on his head, and birds are eating from the topmost one. Joseph's interpretation is that in 3 days, Pharaoh will have him hanged, and Fritham emphasizes the NRSV's translation of the next part of the Hebrew, lift up your head from you, just really hammering home that this guy is toast. And we'll leave him hanging on the tree for the birds to pick clean. Joseph does not ask the baker to remember him to the Pharaoh for obvious reasons. The severity of the punishment, of Pharaoh's punishment, is perhaps more evidence that the baker's crime was treasonous. Perhaps he had participated in a plot to poison the king. If that is the case, then the nature of his punishment makes a lot more sense. Again, when I was a child learning of this, I just felt it was quite extreme. But if you take it into consideration that perhaps he was part of a plot to poison the Pharaoh, then the punishment fits the nature of punishments, and of even to this day, I think the punishment for treason in the United States is the death penalty. So it all makes more sense in that light. This part of the story concludes. On the 3rd day, which was Pharaoh's birthday, he made a feast for all his servants and lifted up the head of the chief cupbearer and the head of the chief baker among his servants. He restored the chief cupbearer to his cupbearing, and he placed the cup in Pharaoh's hand. But the chief baker he hanged, just as Joseph had interpreted to them. Yet the chief cupbearer did not remember Joseph, but forgot him. Handel writes, the cupbearer did not remember Joseph, a fault he will remedy when Pharaoh dreams his dreams. In chapter 41, themes of remembering and forgetting circulate throughout the Joseph story. So back in chapter 37, his brothers forget him in the pit. In 41, he will be remembered by the cupbearer, and you'll see another example of that in 42. Hiebert writes, 2 years later, when Pharaoh needs dreams interpreted, the wine steward will remember how Joseph interpreted his own dreams. At that time, the steward will recommend him to Pharaoh himself. Now, one may well wonder at the forgetfulness of the wine steward. I always have thought it was a bit careless and thoughtless to have your life spared, or at least come to an understanding of what your fate would be, and then to quickly forget this interpreter of dreams. But, and this is all speculation, but given his recent brush with his own possible execution, one might understand why he would keep his mouth shut and his head down. Perhaps he felt that his own situation was still tenuous and was therefore in no position to advocate on Joseph's behalf, or indeed approach the Pharaoh with any request at all. However, after some time has passed, he does introduce the Pharaoh to Joseph, seemingly at the perfect time, which we will learn more about next week when we consider chapter 41. To conclude, 3 words came to my mind after reflecting on this chapter. So I was trying to decide what I thought of Joseph and his character, and the man that we meet in this story as it's portrayed. And these 3 words came to mind: patience. At least I imagine Joseph having patience, showing great patience while in prison. The whole while he is attentive to the needs of those around him. So he's not only patient, but he's paying attention to the anxieties around him, which is what causes him to hone in on the anxieties of the cupbearer and the baker. Discernment. So I guess to piggyback on that theme, he discerns what is wrong in those around him, but he's not only able to discern the meaning of dreams, but is able to understand what actions are necessary in light of their revelation. And we will discover in the next chapters how Joseph's keen ability to interpret dreams and the motives of others will continue to serve him well going forward. When we'll see this again in the big showdown with his brothers, where he's able to sort of string them along in a way that sets the stage for a great reveal and also reconciliation. And then initiative. Up to this point, Joseph has just been sort of strung along. And in the last chapter, you can make the case that it was always the Lord God that was putting Joseph in the place of privilege, in the place where he succeeds. But here we see Joseph actually take action, and we'll see this going forward. Joseph takes action when he can. His initiative is likely what helped to advance him in Potiphar's house back in chapter 39. In chapter 40, he asks a fellow prisoner for help. In chapter 41, he not only interprets the Pharaoh's dreams, but sets before him a plan of action that he will later implement. His initiative and actions will work in synchronization with God's providential favoring of him as he continues to rise in the estimation of the Pharaoh and all of Egypt. Then I'll end with a longer quote from commentary. The New Expositor's commentary, and this part of it was by a man by the last name of Sailhamer, and I'm forgetting his first name. And here we'll see Joseph's praise is just sung to the highest heavens. And I'll end on this quote this week. He writes, Joseph represents the kind of leadership the readers of the Pentateuch will be called on to provide and follow. He is a leader like Daniel, who needs to discern the visions of the prophets to find the course of God's future dealings with his people. He does not have to wait on new prophecies. His task is to discern the meaning of the old. Joseph, like Solomon, is a picture of a truly wise leader who understands and sees the will of God in the affairs of those around him. In this sense, Joseph stands as a prototype of all the later wise men of Israel. All future leaders must stand the test of measurement against him. It is hardly surprising that one sees foreshadowed in the picture of Joseph elements that later resemble David, Solomon, and ultimately the Messiah himself. These are my sources that I consulted, and I will bring us back. Now, I do realize that last bit was fairly high praise, and I also want to say maybe a bit over the top. We'll see in one chapter where Joseph does something that I think is morally dubious. procuring some land from the Egyptians en masse, and that's just kind of another one of those sections where there's like a chapter you feel has been sort of inserted into the narrative, like chapter 38 was. But we'll get to that in the weeks to follow. I'll turn it over to you all for your observations and comments. I assume this is a familiar story that you had heard perhaps many times before, or even taught in Sunday school. Am I correct in that assumption?
I've always wondered, when the cupbearer didn't tell the Pharaoh about it, what good would it have done? I mean, I don't understand how the cupbearer saying, "Oh, this man interpreted dreams for me when I was in prison and told me what was going to happen," how that would have influenced the Pharaoh to bring him out of jail.
One answer to that could be that the Pharaoh, and this is historically verified in other sources outside of the Bible, but the Pharaoh, is part of his consortium of palace people. You had priests and you had soldiers and guards, but you also would have magicians, and magicians isn't to be seen as like doing magic tricks, but rather they were like the wise men we would meet. We'll meet them later. In fact, in the book of Exodus, where Moses's miracles are sought to be replicated by the Pharaoh's magicians, and so maybe Joseph thinks that will give him some clout. I don't really know, though, and perhaps it wouldn't have made any difference whatsoever. So it's as plausible of a speculation as my thoughts that perhaps he just wanted to keep his head down. They're both perhaps, maybe. And I'm also not sure. I'm not sure that, it's almost a moot point, Yeah.
So you were saying that when Joseph made that request to get good PR, so to speak, on his behalf about the dreams, he also took initiative to say, he said, well, interpretations belong to God. Try me out. I mean, he did sort of, he was advertising himself as an interpreter of dreams. So, oh, there's the kitty cat. Yeah, oh, hello.
You may have heard the door open when I was reading that last quote. Whilst that was happening, I was carrying my tablet to the door because he was meowing outside. Remember, this is the cat that lets himself out and wants back in.
That's right. Oh, yeah. Hello.
He wants down.
Anyway, he's kind of subtle. I mean, he was saying, and I don't think he was making that up when he says interpretations belong to God. He definitely was putting that out there that, hey, I can help. So he's a subtle kind of salesman. And maybe that shows up in other ways later on.
And I guess to carry on with what I was saying with Sue before she hopped off for her play, I presume. If you could interpret dreams, if you were known to be the guy, the reliable one, the Pharaoh would want you near and close, because he might be having all sorts of dreams in any given night, depending on what he ate the night before. And if you were trying to read omens and portents into those dreams, you would want a guy with a reliable track record that could at least tell you, at the very least, what you wanted to hear, and at the very best, make some accurate guesses. Now you hear some of my own skepticism is coming out about how all this works, but some accurate guesses that might help the Pharaoh do well in battle, or make a right choice about a marriage. And so, it was people who could interpret dreams. If people believe that you were good at it, you could have some clout.
So it was a good audition. It was a good opportunity.
Yeah.
So, and who can blame him? I mean, it was a good opportunity.
Yeah. I see Janet went and got her dog.
Black and white is the theme here.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Nancy, if you're talking, you're on mute.
I was thinking, when about God's timing. I think God inspired Joseph to speak at the right time by working through his wisdom and his ability to discern.
Mhm. Yeah.
Yeah, and we'll see. Joseph becomes the master of the relational dynamics with the persons that he interacts with going forward. Pharaoh will continue to love him. The Egyptians will love him by extension. And then when his family comes around him and begins to interact with him again, when they're there to seek out food that is in great supply because of Joseph's acumen and ability to see into the future, he'll play them along for his own purposes, which we discover are to teach them some lessons, make them sit in the hot seat for a bit, but then ultimately reconcile. And so he does seem to have, the man we meet in this story seems to have this knack for being in command of the relational dynamics and listening for the right things and knowing when to speak and when to act.
So what was to be accomplished by telling the baker that he's going to die?
I mean,
their relational dynamics.
It's not exactly like he was sitting in the role of doctor where he was morally obligated to say, hey, it's terminal, right? Like he could have been like, oh, you're gonna feed some birds later, get some rest, just have a good night's sleep, do some things that you love, I don't know. I maybe in terms of this, think of it in terms of the narrative. So there's the questions of the historicity of these persons is not the important thing. It's about what is a story trying to teach us, and the story is trying to teach us here that Joseph has this in with God in such a way that he can interpret the dreams. And so that's why they keep coming in couplets. The commentators believe that when they come in couplets like that, it is just really emphasizing the point that this is a divine dream. And I guess Joseph's ability to do it twice just verifies that. I can only take their word for it, but that's what they say. So maybe just to round it off, I guess, and to give more validity to his ability to interpret, because not only was he right once, he was right twice about two very different outcomes.
Mm-hmm. And when I said what I said, I didn't mean it in a manipulative way. I think just in a powerful way.
Yeah.
He stepped in and said, "This is my power, and I'm going to tell you, I'm going to let you in on it. I'm going to say, here I am. Here I am. I'm in this prison, but this is what I do, and this is these belong to God. These interpretations belong to God." But I wonder too if it didn't serve Pharaoh in some way, like maybe by telling this baker that the interpretation belongs to God, that you're guilty. That it may have hastened some.
If he was guilty of some capital crime, maybe it would put him, again, all speculation, but maybe it put him in a position to reckon with what he had done and to get his own emotional and mental house in order.
So I don't know, but it may have served some other purpose.
But when I was a kid, it really was, I do not think I'm remembering this wrong. I really do think it was framed to me like Pharaoh didn't like the food, or Pharaoh was upset. It's something petty. But I guess once I read in the commentaries the importance of the role of cupbearer and baker, I was like, oh, duh, that's in so many other stories that I've read. Right. It was even the classic trope where the cupbearer would be forced to take a drink first to make sure that it wasn't, it doesn't say that in this story, but that sort of thing. And then I was like, oh, okay, now it makes a lot more sense what's going on here.
I don't believe when we taught this to the children, we emphasized the story of the baker. It might be just that, Joseph knew he was able to interpret their dreams or something like that.
The
don't
people,
Got to
my
the-
Bible teachers, and I don't harp on the same point, be a broken record, but they very much believe that you face the violent aspects of the scriptures head on, and you don't even try to like force them into some moral framework that is more acceptable. What you do is you just say, yep, God can do that, and that's fine. And it really will do a number on you. So, I mean, I have memories of, illustrations, and I may have brought this up before, but there's a story where a woman named Jael runs a tent peg through the head.
The story is horrible.
Yeah, and I remember in my children's Bible story book that is still at my parents' house.
Oh my.
She's like pulling back a tent flap, and she's got a hammer and a tent peg, and she's just about to go in, and there he is in there prone sleeping, and that's the sort of thing I was raised with. So, I mean, I definitely remember learning about the fate of the baker and all that signified.
I don't think that's the way we were to teach these stories in the current disciples material or
Well,
even Methodist materials.
Here's what I think the disciples in the mainline churches, broadly speaking, should have done and should do now, is you need to address who Phyllis Tribble calls the texts of terror. She is a Bible interpreter who interprets from the feminist perspective, and she says there are texts of terror, and you need to educate yourself about them, what they are saying, the historical context that they were in, and have a dialogue with them and not ignore them. Not to make them okay, but to say, here's why they're not okay, and here's how they come up against other currents and themes in the Bible that are life-giving, in fact, and saying the opposite of those things. And so I've run into this a lot where there's mainline Christians, broadly speaking, who are unfamiliar with these stories, and then when a fundamentalist bashes them over the head with that, as if they were arguments in God's favor for nationalism or for some really toxic religious idea, you don't know what to do. Just like, I'd rather avoid. So I'm grateful for my exposure to them in retrospect. However, I have friends who never recovered and who left the church and think that that's all religion is about. And so there has been real damage done. But that's why I haven't avoided those here in this Bible study. We'll go into those things and sit with them.
Heath, what was the name of the author of that book you just talked about, the feminist?
Phyllis Tribble.
Okay.
Tribble, I believe. Texts of Terror.
Text
It's a
of
classic.
Okay.
Yeah, it's a classic work that really just emphasizes the nastiest ones. And she comes at it from a Christian perspective. She's trying to help people engage them in a fruitful way.
Right. Because there are the opposites usually somewhere.
And
the opposite perspective. Yeah.
Those of us who have engaged that book and talked about it, it's always the same. If we came from the background like I came from, we're like, it's therapeutic. You're like, we can finally own how we were made to feel about this, but we also still love the Bible and appreciate it for what it is, the good, the bad, and the ugly.
And the ugly, yes.
Yeah.
And the ugly. Okay. I have a comment. This is a nothing comment, but I just always, this was presented to me as a child as a Bible story. And so I always think of it as a story, not history. So I don't know. And that makes a difference to me somehow. I don't know. I just a little nibble there. Like in my little Bible storybook, it was a story. And I think of it as well polished with a purpose. Does that make sense? That's what you were saying, really.
That's all good. Yeah. Because when you try to this whole question about earlier, like what are the underlying motives? It's fun to speculate, but it's just like speculating about any other story. You don't, that what's really going on in the psychology of, say, the baker or whoever
Right.
else is really
Yeah.
not the point that the narrative is serving. It's
Yeah.
fun to try to add more layers to the characters through trying to, through hypotheticals or do some speculating as to what normal people would be thinking in those circumstances. It adds a richness to a story. But you're right, it's not.
Yeah, Joseph is the main character, and he and God is their relationship and how God is working in there somehow.
And the
guess.
narrative
Sort of.
is moving him
Yeah.
and us to a certain place for a purpose.
Right.
It's not a
Yeah.
chronologue of date and times, and like now we think
It's
of
not
it.
history. It's not history because there's not enough. It's smooth. It's polished. That's just how it presents to me. It's like it's a story. So anyway.
I'd like to see you do a Bible study on Text of Terror. I'm really interested. It's because people are interpreting it like that. I think very important for these times or today. When people of so many faiths, Abrahamic faiths, that maybe they interpret that so it's okay to.
We just finished, Kelly and I just finished a book study with a group of friends of ours who they all go to, I would just say, evangelical mega churches, but they were willing to go through with us a book called Inspired by Rachel Held Evans. She just recently passed away unexpectedly. Really? But it's a book that has whole chapters on these themes, written beautifully. That's what makes it so accessible. She's an excellent writer, and it's an excellent book for this sort of thing, to help give you new tools for approaching the Bible from a vantage point of devotion and faithfulness. And it was met with mixed results. Some people in the group, it was about 12 of us, were like, oh, I'm so glad I don't have to read the Bible the way I thought I had to read. And then there were others who just walls went up. And then one comment afterwards, as we were deciding on what the next book to do, was we need to get back to the Bible and a biblical understanding of the world. And I was like, the whole book was about the Bible through a critical interpretive lens. And by critical, I don't mean criticizing, but like using the tools of that have been developed for the past 2-3 centuries in biblical interpretation, done in a very, very, she has a gift for making these concepts very accessible. I guess I'm agreeing with you, Janet. It just reminded me of that Bible study where it is a very delicate work to do, because you don't want people to hear that you don't want people to feel like you are attacking the foundations of their faith and a point of connection between them and the reality in God. And for some people, that is a specific understanding of the Bible that has been developed culturally, that didn't generate from the Bible, but it was more of a cultural development and frankly a reaction to kind of the aftermath of the Reformation, where Protestants were wondering what speaks with authority. If it's not the Pope, what speaks with authority? And Protestants came up with a unique approach to the Bible that was ahistorical, but it basically think of a Pope speaking ex cathedra in the singular voice. That's the way that the Bible was elevated to. And unless you know the history of how that happened, you just think it's always been that way. And when somebody senses you are knocking that pedestal out from under them, if that's all they know, you could do a lot of damage. So it's I guess what I'm saying is, Janet, is yes, that would be a great thing to do. I'm going to have to plan ahead.
Well, but in a book study, or in a book club, everybody reads and then discusses. Nobody has to be a leader, right? A book club is generally leaderless. Or do you like to have one person take a chapter and be the leader, or do you think it's so important that a book study be led?
I think one person to send out the link to, like, if it's a Zoom meeting, or to tell you what times is helpful, and maybe somebody who knows how to come up with the icebreakers. But generally, it's there's no one person teaching, it's the books teaching.
Right.
And the specific book study that I'm talking about that we did ended a couple of months ago, Kelly and I were like the very obvious proponents of the ideas in it.
Yeah.
We were so it often felt as though this was our agenda, which we didn't suggest the book.
Carrying it.
Yeah, we didn't suggest the book. Somebody else who had heard about it suggested the book, and they just asked us as we were ending a previous book, "What do you think of this book?" And I was like, "Really like it. I think we should do that one." And they didn't quite know what they were in for, but they got through it, with the exception of one family who really did drop out after about 4 weeks, and then came at the last meeting when we were discussing what's next and made the comment, "We need to get back to the Bible." So. What are you gonna do?
Well, it served its purpose. I mean, it got people thinking and talking, and
Yeah,
And they came back. They came back.
Yeah,
They
and
did
it was a positive experience for, I think, most people, even if it stretched them. It stretched them in healthy ways, I think. So, well, this was great discussion, and I look forward to next week. It's a longer chapter, so that's going to make it a longer lesson. It's going to be similar in the amount of commentary that I need to bring into the discussion, and that, again, it's a very, like a story would be. It's pretty straightforward in terms of what we're supposed to come away thinking, and so there won't be a lot of those, those aha little gems of moments where you're like, oh, I never knew that was what this was trying to say. But it's a good story, and I'm looking forward to it. So I'll see you all next week.
well, I have an appointment. I'm sorry.
Oh, that's okay. Just catch the recording later.
I will. I'd
We will
rather
miss
do
you.
it. I'd rather do it in person, but
Yeah.
okay.
And for Casey Allens and Judy, I'm sorry that on Sunday I was not present at the Zoom call there. I don't know if you.
It's okay. We and
Need to be
Sue,
present.
Sue,
Yeah.
Sue and John joined us, and
Oh,
so,
good.
Yeah, we had a 3-state coalition. So
That's great. That's enough to attack it. Never mind.
yeah.
I'm being naughty there. Some think it's enough to go. Anyway, I'll end there. Take
Okay.
care.
Okay,
Okay,
Ray.
Bye.
Bye.
Larry says bye. You're sitting on the
Bye-bye.
sofa, so you don't want to.
Bye, Larry.
Bye.
Bye.